There are moments in life when everything breaks, not loudly, not dramatically, but so quietly that you don't realize the sound you're hearing is your future cracking in half. The coffee still smells the same. The city still wakes up on schedule. The person beside you still breathes with the same familiar rhythm. And yet, somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, your entire life becomes something you no longer recognize. That was the kind of morning it was. The kind that looks harmless in hindsight. The kind people always say they never saw coming. Nia Carter woke up at 6:12 a.m., the way she always did on weekdays, before the alarm had a chance to interrupt her thoughts. Outside the bedroom window, Chicago was just beginning to stir. Muted traffic, the distant wail of a siren, the pale gray light of early spring pressing against the skyline. Nothing about the morning suggested it would be the last normal one she would ever have. She lay still for a moment, listening. Beside her, Ethan Walker slept on his back, one arm flung carelessly over his forehead. White American, tall, conventionally handsome in a way that made people trust him before he ever spoke. A senior executive in real estate development, polished and confident, the kind of man who knew how to dominate a room without raising his voice. The kind of man other men admired and women found reassuring. Her husband, 7 years together, 5 years married, a shared condo overlooking the river, shared friends, shared routines, shared assumptions. Nia slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake him. She moved through the apartment on instinct. Bathroom, sink, mirror. She looked at her reflection with the detached familiarity of someone who spent her life analyzing risk. 36 years old, Black American, sharp eyes, calm face. A woman whose career depended on noticing what others missed. She was a corporate risk and compliance consultant, brought in when companies suspected something was wrong, but couldn't yet prove it. Her job was to trace invisible lines, to follow patterns until the truth revealed itself. Fortune 500 executives listened when she spoke. Boards approved her recommendations without argument. At home, though, she wasn't analyzing anything. At home, she trusted. In the kitchen, she started the coffee maker and leaned against the counter, scrolling briefly through overnight emails on her phone. Nothing urgent, nothing alarming, just another Thursday, another predictable start to a predictable life. She heard Ethan stir in the bedroom. "Morning," he mumbled when she stepped back in, his eyes still closed. "Morning," she replied, smiling automatically. He asked about her day. She asked about his meeting later. Small talk, practiced and effortless, the language of long-term intimacy. When she returned to the kitchen to pour the coffee, she noticed his work tablet on the counter, screen faintly glowing. That alone was unusual. Ethan was meticulous about his devices. Passwords, face recognition, auto locks set aggressively short. He'd once lectured her for leaving her laptop unattended at a cafe, telling her she was too trusting, that the world didn't reward carelessness. But this morning, the tablet was unlocked. Nia didn't touch it right away. She wasn't suspicious, not yet. Curiosity came first, mild and unthreatening. The screen displayed a messaging app she didn't recognize, a conversation left open mid-thread, as if someone had meant to return and never did. She took a step closer. One line of text sat at the top of the screen, unfinished, glowing softly in the early light. It took her less than a second to understand it, less than a second for 7 years of certainty to begin unraveling. And before we go any further, before the pieces start falling, before the lies reveal themselves, if stories about resilience, quiet strength, and women who refuse to stay small resonate with you, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and follow the channel. Not just to support the story, but to remind yourself that you're not alone in recognizing truth when it finally shows itself. Nia stood there, one hand resting on the counter, the other tightening slowly into a fist. Behind her, Ethan coughed softly in his sleep. The coffee machine beeped, cheerful and oblivious. And in that ordinary, unremarkable kitchen, on a morning that was never supposed to matter, Nia Carter felt something shift so subtly It didn't register as pain at first. It felt like cold, like clarity, like the sudden awareness that whatever came next would change everything. She hadn't read the message yet, but she already knew. Somewhere deep in her bones, the part of her that had built a career on recognizing risk before it exploded understood a single, devastating truth. This wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a reckoning. For a long moment, Nia didn't move. She stood in the kitchen with the coffee growing cold beside her, the tablet's glow reflecting faintly against the marble countertop. The city outside continued as if nothing had happened. Cars passed. Someone laughed on the sidewalk below. A delivery truck hissed to a stop. The world apparently had not received the memo that her life was about to split cleanly in two. She told herself she was overreacting, that there had to be context, that 7 years of love didn't collapse because of a single sentence on a screen. So she leaned closer and read it again. We can't keep pretending much longer. It's been almost 2 years. When are you going to tell her? Her breath left her in a slow, careful exhale. Not a gasp, not a sob, just air quietly escaping, as if her body already understood that oxygen was suddenly optional. 2 years, not weeks, not a mistake, not a drunken lapse wrapped in guilt and apologies. 2 years meant planning. 2 years meant intention. 2 years meant waking up beside her, kissing her goodbye, asking about her work, making dinner plans, while living an entirely separate life alongside it. Her fingers hovered above the screen, then moved with deliberate precision. She scrolled. There were more messages, dozens, hundreds, a long, intimate record of a relationship that had grown unchecked in the shadows of her marriage. Late-night confessions, shared jokes, complaints disguised as vulnerability, and threaded through all of it, like a quiet poison, was her name. She doesn't notice anything. She's so focused on her job. She trusts me completely. Nia felt something inside her chest tighten, not with pain yet, but with a dawning sense of humiliation, so sharp it almost felt surgical. She kept reading. The woman's name was Lauren Pierce, 28, marketing consultant, smart, ambitious, younger in the way men like Ethan always pretended didn't matter. Until it did. Lauren believed Ethan was separated, that the marriage was a formality, that Nia was a chapter already closing, and Ethan had let her believe it. One message stopped Nia's scrolling. Once the divorce is finalized, everything will be easier. I just need to be strategic. She makes more than I do, and most of the assets are tied to her income. I can't afford to rush this. Strategic. The word landed differently than the others. Affairs were emotional. Lies were personal. But strategy, that was something else entirely. She read on, slower now. Discussions about timing, about lawyers, about what he'd be entitled to. Conversations that treated her life not as a shared history, but as a balance sheet waiting to be divided. He spoke of her penthouse equity, her consulting contracts, her reputation, her connections. Not with resentment, with calculation. She'll be fine, he'd written in one thread. She's resilient. And honestly, she owes me. I supported her for years while she built that career. Nia almost laughed at that. The sound rose in her throat, brittle and unfamiliar, and she swallowed it back down. Supported her. The audacity of it was almost impressive. He had enjoyed the lifestyle her income provided, the doors her work opened, the credibility of being married to a woman executives respected, and somewhere along the way, he had decided that translated into ownership. She scrolled until the messages blurred together, until her reflection on the darkened screen looked unfamiliar, like a stranger watching from the other side of glass. Behind her, the bedroom creaked softly. Ethan shifted in his sleep, unaware that his carefully managed illusion was bleeding out into the open. Nia locked the tablet. She didn't slam it. She didn't throw it across the room. She closed it gently, as if returning a dangerous object to its sheath. 7 years replayed themselves in her mind with brutal efficiency. The missed dinners, the late meetings, the business trips that suddenly made sense. Every moment she'd given him the benefit of the doubt rearranged itself into a new, damning pattern. This wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. He hadn't merely fallen in love with someone else. He had rewritten the narrative of their marriage in his own mind, casting himself as the patient partner, the overlooked man, the one entitled to compensation for tolerating her success. Nia rested both hands on the counter and finally felt it. The fracture. Not hysterical grief, not blind rage. Something colder, heavier. The realization that the man she had trusted most in the world did not see her as a person to be honest with, but as a problem to be managed, an obstacle to be outmaneuvered, a resource to be extracted from before moving on. In the bedroom, Ethan's alarm went off. He groaned, reached to silence it, and called out casually, "Babe, you make coffee?" "Yes," Nia said, her voice steady enough to surprise even her. "It's ready." She picked up his favorite mug, poured it exactly the way he liked, 2 sugars, a splash of oat milk, and carried it toward the bedroom. If Ethan had looked at her then, really looked, he might have noticed something different, a stillness behind her eyes, a recalibration already underway. But he didn't look, and that was the last mistake he would make without consequences. Ethan drank his coffee without looking up. He sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone, already half elsewhere, already mentally arranging the lies that would carry him through the day. He didn't notice the way Nia watched him, not with anger, not with disbelief, but with a quiet, unsettling focus, like someone studying a pattern that had finally revealed itself. That was the first thing he never understood about her. Nia Carter did not react the way people expected women to react. She didn't cry in front of him. She didn't demand explanations. She didn't ask why. Why was a useless question. Why invited excuses? Why gave liars room to perform? Instead, she observed. She moved through the morning exactly as she always had. She set her mug in the sink. She grabbed her bag. She asked about his meeting downtown. She nodded at the appropriate moments. She kissed his cheek before leaving, light and familiar, the gesture of a woman who had no idea her marriage was already over. Ethan smiled at her, relieved. In his mind, this was confirmation, proof that he was still in control, that whatever he was doing, whatever he was planning, was working. He had always mistaken her calm for passivity. That mistake went back further than this morning, further than the affair, further even than their marriage. Nia had grown up learning that survival didn't come from noise. It came from awareness, from knowing when to speak and when silence was leverage. Her mother used to say, "Never let people know what you know until it's too late for them to change the outcome." That lesson had followed her into every boardroom she'd ever stepped into. At work, when executives lied to regulators, Nia didn't accuse them outright. She listened. She took notes. She asked neutral questions and let them build their own nooses, thread by careless thread. By the time they realized they'd exposed themselves, the evidence was already documented, time-stamped, and impossible to argue with. Ethan had never seen that version of her. At home, she'd softened. She'd chosen trust. She'd believed intimacy meant transparency. She'd believed marriage meant partnership. And because she never raised her voice, because she never made scenes, because she handled stress quietly, he had decided she was predictable, easy, replaceable. When she stepped into the elevator that morning, the doors closing softly behind her, Nia finally allowed her face to change. Not into grief, not into rage, into precision. She didn't go to work. She didn't go to a friend's house. She didn't even drive away from the building at first. She sat in her car in the underground garage, engine off, phone in her lap, breathing slowly until her thoughts lined up in clean, deliberate rows. Step 1. Preserve evidence. She reopened her cloud storage and created a new folder, innocuously named, buried among dozens of old work files. She uploaded every screenshot she'd taken from Ethan's tablet, full conversations, profile photos, dates, times. She recorded a voice memo summarizing what she'd seen while it was still fresh, her tone clinical, detached. No adjectives, no assumptions, just facts. Step 2, observe behavior. She made a note of his schedule, his meeting, his typical lunch spot, the hours he claimed to be unavailable. Patterns mattered. Patterns always told the truth eventually. Step 3, do nothing visible. That was the hardest part. Doing nothing looked like weakness to people like Ethan. It reassured them. It made them careless. And carelessness was where truth leaked out. Nia rested her head briefly against the steering wheel, closed her eyes, and felt the weight of what she had lost pressed down on her chest. The future she thought she was building, the intimacy she thought was mutual, the version of herself that had believed love was enough to guarantee honesty. She let herself feel it, fully, privately. And then she opened her eyes. What Ethan never understood was this. Nia didn't fall apart under pressure. She reorganized. She recalibrated. She became quieter, sharper, more exacting. Pain didn't make her reckless. It made her dangerous. Upstairs, Ethan would spend the rest of the morning convinced everything was proceeding exactly as planned. That his wife was still the woman waiting at home. That the story he'd been telling, to Lauren, to his lawyer, to himself, was intact. He didn't know that by the time the elevator doors closed behind her, Nia Carter had already stopped being his wife in the way that mattered most. She had become his auditor. And audits, once they begin, do not end in explanations. They end in consequences. Nia didn't remember driving out of the garage. She remembered the weight in her chest, the way her hands tightened around the steering wheel, the city blurring past her windshield as if Chicago itself had lost focus. Red lights turned green, streets unfolded. Muscle memory carried her forward while her mind lagged behind. Still standing in that kitchen, still staring at a sentence that had quietly detonated her life. She didn't go far. 3 blocks from the condo, she turned abruptly and pulled beneath an overpass, where the noise of traffic layered itself into a constant roar. Concrete pillars rose around her like indifferent witnesses. It wasn't a beautiful place. It wasn't symbolic. It was simply empty enough. She parked, turned off the engine, and sat there in silence that wasn't really silence at all. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then her body betrayed her. The first sob tore out of her without warning, sharp, involuntary, violent in its honesty. She pressed her palm against her mouth, as if the sound might be too loud, as if the world might hear her breaking. Her shoulders shook, her vision blurred. Tears spilled down her face, uncontained, ungraceful, soaking into the collar of her coat. This was not the controlled grief she'd expected. This was raw, ugly, the kind that clawed its way up from somewhere ancient and refused to be reasoned with. She cried for the woman she had been that morning, confident, trusting, unaware. She cried for the years she had given freely, believing they were building something mutual. She cried for the quiet humiliations she hadn't even known were happening. Most of all, she cried because the truth was now irreversible. You could not unread a message like that. You could not unknow that your husband had been planning your exit from his life with spreadsheets and legal language while you were still asking him what he wanted for dinner. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. The sound sliced through her sobs like a blade. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Ethan never texted this early unless something disrupted his routine. She let the phone vibrate itself into silence, then buzz again and again. Each vibration felt like an intrusion, like a hand reaching into a wound that was still bleeding. "Not yet," she whispered, though no one could hear her. "Not yet." She leaned forward, forehead pressed against the steering wheel, and let the grief finish its work. Let it tear through her chest. Let it burn. Let it exhaust itself until her throat ached and her breathing slowed into something almost steady. Time passed strangely under the overpass. Minutes stretched. The world above continued without her. Cars drove by filled with people who had no idea that a woman below them was dismantling the life she thought she had. Eventually, the sobs softened into quiet shudders. Nia lifted her head and wiped her face with the back of her hand. Her eyes were swollen. Her reflection in the rearview mirror looked unfamiliar. Mascara smudged, skin blotchy, jaw clenched tight as if holding something dangerous inside. She stared at herself for a long moment. This collapse was what Ethan would have expected if he ever imagined her finding out. Tears, accusations, emotional chaos. The kind of reaction he could later describe as instability if it suited him. The thought settled into her mind with chilling clarity. She straightened in her seat. "No," she said softly. "This part stays here." She reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small pack of tissues, cleaning her face slowly, deliberately. She took a deep breath, then another. She counted them, the way she did before difficult conversations with hostile executives. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Control the physical response, and the mind will follow. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she looked. A text from Ethan. "Running late today. Don't wait up." The simplicity of it nearly undid her again. The casual assumption, the unearned normalcy. He was already lying, already stepping into the other life he'd been nurturing, and he had no idea that the woman reading his message was no longer the one he'd been manipulating. Nia didn't respond. She locked her phone and placed it face down. In that moment, something inside her shifted. Not healed, not resolved, but solidified. The grief was still there, heavy and real, but it was no longer in charge. It moved aside, making room for something else. Decision. She couldn't control what he'd done. She couldn't reclaim the years already spent. But she could control what happened next. She could choose when to confront, how to respond, whether this story ended with her diminished or transformed. She sat there under the overpass until her breathing evened out completely, until the shaking stopped, until the woman in the mirror looked less broken and more focused. When she finally started the car again, her hands were steady. Nia Carter drove back into traffic not as a wife unaware of her husband's betrayal, but as a woman who had allowed herself exactly 15 minutes to fall apart, and no more. Whatever came next would not be driven by grief. It would be driven by clarity. And clarity, she knew from experience, was far more devastating than rage. Nia didn't call a friend. She didn't call her mother or her sister or anyone who loved her enough to tell her everything would be okay. Comfort had its place, but this wasn't that moment. Comfort blurred edges. Comfort softened resolve. What she needed now was precision. She drove until the city thinned just enough to feel anonymous, parked outside a quiet cafe she'd once used for early morning client meetings, and sat with her phone resting in both hands. The screen reflected her face, calmer now, eyes darker, focused. This was the version of herself she trusted, the one who made decisions that changed outcomes. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she was looking for. Denise Holloway. Nia hadn't spoken to her in almost 3 years. Denise was not someone you called casually. She was the attorney executives whispered about when mergers turned hostile and divorces turned nuclear. A black woman in her late 50s, with a reputation for dismantling lies piece by piece, then presenting the wreckage so cleanly that judges had no choice but to rule in her favor. They called her ruthless. Nia knew better. Denise Holloway didn't destroy people emotionally. She destroyed them with facts. The phone rang twice before the line connected. "Holloway," Denise said. Her voice was low, unhurried, edged with authority. "Talk to me." Nia swallowed once. "This is Nia Carter." There was a pause. Not uncertainty, recognition. "I know who you are," Denise replied. "You don't call unless something's already on fire." Nia looked out through the cafe window at pedestrians moving through their ordinary lives. "My husband has been having an affair for 2 years," she said evenly, "and he's planning a strategic divorce to gain access to my assets. I found proof this morning." Another pause, this one heavier. "Do you have copies?" Denise asked. "Yes, screenshots, full threads, dates and times." "Good," Denise said. "Then we're already ahead." The simplicity of that sentence did something unexpected. It steadied Nia's breathing. Not because the situation was suddenly less dire, but because for the first time since the kitchen that morning, someone else was speaking her language. Denise continued, "Here's what you're not going to do. You're not going to confront him. You're not going to change your behavior. You're not going to give him a single reason to suspect you know anything." Nia nodded, even though Denise couldn't see her. "That was my instinct." "Good instinct," Denise said, "because men who plan like this always believe the woman is the variable. They assume emotion will make you sloppy. We let him keep that assumption." Nia closed her eyes briefly. "What do we do first?" "We file first," Denise said without hesitation. "But not yet. First, we build a record so airtight that his lawyer won't even try to be clever. I want financial movement. I want proof of intent. I want timelines that make his version of reality impossible to argue." "And the affair?" Nia asked. "That's context," Denise replied. "The fraud is the weapon." Nia felt a cold clarity settle in her chest. She had suspected as much. Infidelity hurt, but courts cared about numbers, documents, patterns. Denise was already 10 steps ahead, mapping the terrain where this battle would actually be fought. "There's something else," Nia said quietly. "He believes I owe him, that my success belongs to him." Denise laughed softly, not amused, but unimpressed. "Of course he does. Men like that always confuse proximity with contribution. Let him believe it. The law doesn't." Silence stretched between them, not awkward, but deliberate. Then Denise said, "I need you to hear this clearly. From this moment on, everything you do is evidence. Every text he sends, every call, every outburst. You respond to nothing emotionally. You respond to nothing directly. You route everything through me." "I understand." "No," Denise corrected gently. "You don't yet, but you will." Nia opened her eyes. Outside, the sky had brightened. Morning was fully awake now. "Email me what you have," Denise continued. "Secure channel. I'll review it today." And Nia, her voice sharpened just slightly, "You didn't lose control of your marriage. He lost control of the narrative. That's a very different thing." The call ended shortly after. Nia sat there for a moment longer, phone still warm in her hand. She felt it then. Not relief, not victory, but something close. Alignment. For the first time since reading that message, she wasn't reacting. She was moving forward with intention, backed by someone who understood exactly what was at stake. Ethan Walker was planning a divorce he thought he could manage. He had no idea that the woman he married had just placed the first call in a process designed not to hurt him, but to expose him. And exposure, Nia knew, was something no carefully constructed lie ever survived. After Denise, the world felt sharper. Not kinder, not easier, just clearer. Like a fog had lifted to reveal the edges of a cliff Nia hadn't known she was standing near. She finished her coffee without tasting it, wiped her phone screen with a corner of her sleeve like that could erase what she'd seen, and opened her contacts again. Denise had given her a plan. What Nia needed now was proof. Not the kind of proof that made a heart break, the kind that made a judge stop listening to excuses. She scrolled until she found a number she'd saved long ago and hoped she'd never need. Marcus Reed. He wasn't a private investigator in the trench coat, shadowy sense. He was something more unnerving. Someone who understood systems so well he could tell you where a lie would eventually leak out. Former federal financial crimes investigator, now a forensic analyst who worked quietly behind high-stakes lawsuits, corporate scandals, and, when necessary, divorces that involved money and malice. They'd met once at a compliance conference in D.C. 2 years ago. He'd spoken on a panel about fraud patterns, how people always thought they were smarter than the records they left behind. Afterward, he'd handed her a card with no company logo, just a name and a number. "If you ever need something found," he'd said, "and you need it found clean, call me. Don't explain it in text." Nia stared at his name for 3 seconds, then hit dial. It rang once. He answered on the second ring. "Reed." His voice was calm, unhurried, as if he'd been expecting trouble. as if trouble was simply another Tuesday. Marcus, Nia said. It's Nia Carter. A pause. Then, I remember you. You don't sound like you're calling to say hello. My husband is cheating, Nia said, and heard how flat it sounded, how factual. And he's planning to divorce me strategically. I have messages, 2 years worth, but I need everything else. Financial movement, hidden accounts, anything he's trying to bury. Marcus didn't gasp, didn't react. He only asked, Illinois? Yes. Chicago. Do you share accounts? Yes. Joint checking, joint savings. But I have separate accounts he doesn't touch. And he has access to your credit? Marcus asked. Nia hesitated. He shouldn't. Marcus's silence sharpened. That's not an answer. Nia swallowed. We're married, so maybe, indirectly. Understood, Marcus said. Here's what I can do legally and what I can't. I can't hack. I don't do illegal surveillance. I don't cross lines that make your case messy. But I can trace patterns. I can pull public records. I can build a clean financial map from the outside in. And if he's moving money, I'll find the shape of it. Nia's grip tightened around the phone. How fast? Another pause, like he was calculating the weight of her urgency. If you can meet me, he said, I can start immediately. I'm at a cafe near. Text me the address, Marcus interrupted. No details, just location. Nia sent the address. Then she sat back, heart thudding, and checked the time on her phone. 9:18 a.m. The cafe around her was quiet, filled with people working on laptops, sipping drinks, living in harmless ignorance. Nia watched the door, not because she expected drama, but because her body had entered a new mode. Alert, ready, scanning. The same mode she used when clients swore nothing was wrong, and she knew, in her bones, that it was. At 9:48 a.m., the door opened. A man stepped inside and paused, letting his eyes adjust. He wasn't flashy, medium height, lean build, a face that could disappear in a crowd, the kind you'd forget 5 minutes after seeing it, except for his eyes. His eyes were sharp in a way that made you feel observed, even when he wasn't looking directly at you. Marcus Reed scanned the room once, then spotted her and walked over. Exactly 30 minutes. He didn't smile. He didn't offer small talk. He slid into the chair across from her as if they were already mid-conversation. Nia, he said, calm and direct, tell me the structure, assets, accounts, property, anything in your name, anything in his. And then tell me what he thinks he can take. Nia blinked once. The speed of it, his arrival, his focus, made something inside her chest tighten with a strange mix of fear and relief. The condo is in both our names, she said. But the down payment came from me. I have documentation. My retirement and investment accounts are separate. Our joint accounts are shared. He makes good money, but my income is higher. And he's been spending more lately. Marcus nodded, already forming a mental ledger. What about his employment? Any businesses? LLCs? He works for a development firm. No LLC that I know of. Marcus leaned back slightly. People like your husband rarely cheat in only one way, he said quietly. Affairs cost money. Lies cost planning. And strategic divorces usually have a trail, because strategy is just fraud with better manners. Nia felt the words land hard. She looked down at the table, then back up. He's careful, she said. He always has been. Marcus's expression didn't change. Careful people leave cleaner trails. They still leave trails. He reached into his bag and pulled out a thin folder and a small notebook. Old school, analog, like he trusted paper more than screens when the stakes were personal. I'm going to start with the easiest leaks, he said. Property records, court filings, business registrations. Then I'm going to look for pressure points. Debt, lifestyle inflation, unusual transfers. If he's been moving money for months, he thinks the small amounts make him invisible. Nia's stomach tightened. And if he opened credit in my name? Marcus's gaze sharpened. Then it stops being a divorce problem, he said. It becomes a criminal one. The air between them, turned colder. Naya didn't speak for a moment. She could hear Denise's voice in her head. Everything you do is evidence now. She could feel the shape of the story changing, from betrayal into something more dangerous, more consequential. Marcus lowered his voice. One more question, he said. Does the other woman know you exist? Nia's jaw tightened. Not the truth. She thinks they're separated. Marcus nodded, as if confirming a familiar pattern. Then your husband isn't just lying to you. He's running two narratives at once. And sooner or later, those narratives collide. He slid a business card across the table. Plain, unbranded, just his name in a secure email. Send me what you have, he said. Screenshots, dates, anything that mentions money, lawyers, assets, and Nia. He paused, watching her carefully. You're going to feel tempted to confront him, to reclaim your dignity with words. Nia's throat tightened. I know. Marcus shook his head once, slow. Don't. Dignity is not something you argue for. Dignity is something you take back with action. He stood, as if the meeting was over and the real work had already begun. I'll message you an update tonight, he said. If he's hiding anything, you'll know soon. Nia watched him walk out of the cafe and blend seamlessly into the morning. And for the first time since that message on Ethan's tablet, she felt something that wasn't grief. Not yet victory, but momentum. Because now, it wasn't just her word against his. Now, the truth had a professional who knew exactly where it liked to hide and exactly how to drag it into the light. Marcus's first message arrived just after midnight. Nia was sitting on the edge of the bed, the room dark except for the thin line of city light slipping through the curtains. Ethan lay beside her, already asleep, one arm heavy across the mattress, where she no longer let him touch her. His breathing was slow, confident, the sleep of a man who believed his world was still intact. Her phone vibrated once. Then again, she slipped quietly out of bed and locked herself in the bathroom, turning on the sink to drown out any sound. The mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized, not broken, not panicked, but unnervingly still. She picked up her phone. I started pulling threads. You were right. He's lying to everyone. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from anticipation. She sat on the closed toilet lid and read. Marcus didn't waste words. He laid it out cleanly, methodically, like an autopsy. Ethan Walker wasn't just cheating. He was managing narratives. To Lauren, he was the misunderstood man, trapped in a marriage that had already ended emotionally. He told her he and Nia lived separate lives, separate bedrooms, separate futures, that the divorce papers were almost ready, delayed only by lawyers and logistics. Lauren believed him because he fed her just enough truth to anchor the lie. To his employer, Ethan was the reliable executive under pressure at home, the devoted husband quietly enduring marital strain while maintaining performance. Marcus had found internal emails, nothing explicit but carefully worded explanations for missed meetings, flexible hours, unexplained absences. Sympathy currency spent slowly. To his lawyer, Ethan was the strategist, the victim, the man who had supported his wife's career and was now being left behind financially. He framed the marriage as a partnership where his contributions were intangible but essential. Emotional labor, stability, sacrifice. He positioned himself as someone owed compensation for years of invisible work. And to Nia, he was still pretending nothing was wrong. Marcus's message continued. There's more. His last employer quietly terminated him 18 months ago. Ethics violation. Inflated expense reports tied to client development. Nothing criminal, but enough that they offered him a resignation instead of a public fire. Nia's breath caught. 18 months. The same length of time as the affair. Everything aligned with sickening precision. The late nights, the new opportunity, the sudden urgency about finances. He hadn't just started cheating because he fell out of love. He cheated because his carefully constructed identity had cracked. And instead of facing it, he'd look for someone else to hold the pieces. Marcus went on. He's under financial pressure. significant pressure, lifestyle inflation, credit usage inconsistent with his income. He's maintaining appearances he can't afford alone. Nia closed her eyes. That explained the desperation, the strategy, the fixation on what he could extract from her life before walking away. Ethan hadn't just been planning a divorce. He'd been planning an escape. Marcus's final line made her stomach drop. Lauren doesn't know about the financial situation. She thinks he's stable. He's lying to her too. Nia stared at the screen for a long moment, the sink still running, the bathroom filled with artificial noise. A strange clarity settled over her. Not relief, not satisfaction, but understanding. This wasn't personal. That realization hurt more than the betrayal itself. Ethan wasn't destroying her because she'd failed him. He was using her because she was convenient, because her competence, her income, her credibility had propped up the version of himself he wanted to believe in. And when that version began to collapse, he reached for replacements. First emotional, then financial. She thought of all the times he'd subtly diminished her achievements, the jokes about her work obsession, the way he'd reframed her discipline as coldness, her boundaries as distance. He hadn't been threatened by her strength in the abstract. He'd been threatened by what her strength revealed about his own fragility. Nia turned off the sink and looked at her reflection. "You didn't underestimate me," she whispered. "You misunderstood me." Behind the bathroom door, Ethan shifted in his sleep, completely unaware that the woman he believed was predictable had just discovered the full architecture of his deception. She returned to the bedroom quietly and lay down on her side of the bed, staring at the ceiling. Her heart felt strangely calm now, as if the truth, once fully illuminated, had burned away confusion along with hope. She didn't hate him. Hate implied intimacy, investment, emotional engagement. What she felt instead was something colder and far more final. Disengagement. Ethan Walker thought he was clever because he'd been lying consistently. But consistency wasn't intelligence. It was just repetition. And repetition, Nia knew, always left patterns behind. Marcus would keep pulling threads. Denise would build the framework. And Ethan, so careful, so convinced he was managing every angle, would continue performing for an audience that no longer existed. Because the most dangerous moment for a liar isn't when they're discovered. It's when the person they're lying to stops reacting and starts watching. And Nia Carter was watching everything. The next morning, Nia woke before Ethan did and lay perfectly still, listening to him breathe. His sleep had a rhythm she once found comforting, steady, confident, entitled. Now it sounded like a metronome counting down to consequences. She watched the slow rise and fall of his chest and felt something almost unnerving in its absence. She didn't feel love. She didn't even feel rage. She felt distance. In the kitchen, she moved through the familiar motions like someone wearing her own life as a costume. Coffee, toast, the low hum of the refrigerator, the soft glow of her phone as she checked Marcus's secure updates and Denise's instructions. "Everything you do is evidence now." She repeated it in her mind, the way she repeated policies before hostile meetings. Not as reassurance, but as discipline. Ethan wandered in just after 7, loosening his tie, hair still damp from the shower. He kissed her cheek, light and practiced. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied, matching his tone perfectly. He poured himself coffee and talked about his day as if nothing was wrong. A pitch meeting, a lunch with investors, a site visit across town. The words were ordinary, but Nia heard what lived underneath them. The constant shaping of narrative, the silent assumption that she existed to stabilize his life. He barely asked about her schedule. When he did, it was vague. "You busy today?" "Yes," she said. "Always." He smiled as if that explained everything. As if her success were a predictable weather pattern he could plan around. Day 1 was the hardest because her body hadn't caught up to her mind. Grief still drifted in like smoke at random moments. When she saw his toothbrush beside hers. When she caught herself reaching automatically for his favorite snack at the grocery store. when his hand brushed her back as he passed in the hallway, and her skin flinched before she could control it. But she controlled it anyway. That night, Ethan claimed a late meeting. Nia nodded, warm and understanding. Of course. She watched him leave with that familiar confidence, the subtle haste of a man heading toward a life he believed was hidden. When the door closed behind him, Nia didn't collapse. She opened her laptop. She created a timeline, not emotional, not poetic. A timeline the way she would build one for a corporate investigation. Dates, times, claims, contradictions. When Ethan said he was out of town, when he said he was working late, when large purchases appeared on joint statements, when affection faded, when he became strategic. She didn't label him evil. She labeled him measurable. At 11:47 p.m., Marcus sent another encrypted message. Found a rental address. Not in your name. Paid through an account linked to a separate debit card. Still tracing origin. Also, he's been searching Illinois spousal support high earner and how to claim partner's business in divorce. Nia stared at the message until the words sharpened into something almost physical. He wasn't just planning to leave. He was planning to win. She forwarded everything to Denise. Then she deleted the messages from her phone, washed her face, and returned to bed beside Ethan, as if she'd been waiting for him all along. He climbed in, smelling faintly of cologne and cold air, slid an arm around her waist and murmured, "Sorry I'm late." "It's okay," she whispered. He fell asleep in minutes. Nia lay awake, eyes open, feeling the weight of his arm like a chain. Day 2, she performed better. Performance was easier when you weren't hoping anymore. She went to work and sat through meetings with the same calm authority she always had, as if her personal life hadn't become a war room. She delivered recommendations to a client about risk exposure and internal controls, and the irony of it almost made her dizzy. That afternoon, Ethan texted her, "Dinner tonight? I can be home early." Home early. A gift. A performance for her benefit. Nia stared at the message, then typed back, "Sure, that would be nice." When he arrived, he brought flowers. Expensive, carefully chosen. The kind of bouquet that would make a stranger think he adored his wife. He smiled when he handed them to her, waiting for gratitude. "Thought we could have a good night," he said. Nia smiled. "Thank you." She arranged the flowers in a vase and listened to him talk through dinner. He told stories. He laughed. He made plans for the weekend. Plans, as if the future still belonged to him. At one point, he reached across the table and touched her hand. His thumb stroked her knuckles in a gesture that used to make her feel loved. Now it felt like manipulation wearing the shape of tenderness. "Everything okay?" he asked suddenly, studying her face. Nia's heart thudded once, quick, sharp. Had she slipped? She blinked slowly, a calm mask settling back into place. Why wouldn't it be? Ethan held her gaze for a moment too long, suspicion flickering like a shadow. Then he smiled and looked away, reassured by what he thought was her predictability. That night he left the table to take a call. Nia listened from the kitchen as his voice dropped into that intimate tone. Soft, warm, private. Not the tone he used with investors. Not the tone he used with colleagues. The tone he once used with her. She washed dishes quietly, letting the water run, letting her face remain neutral. She didn't need to hear the words to know who he was speaking to. When he returned, he kissed her forehead. "You know I love you, right?" he said. Nia looked at him, really looked. A man who had rewritten their marriage into a strategy document. A man who could say the words without feeling the weight of them. "I know," she replied softly. Day 3 arrived like a held breath. By then, Nia's grief had hardened into something clean. Not numbness, clarity. She no longer wondered if she was overreacting. She no longer searched her memory for signs she'd missed in order to blame herself. Instead, she watched Ethan with the detached patience of someone waiting for a trap to spring. Because what Ethan didn't understand, what he would never understand, was that Nia's calm wasn't surrender. It was containment. She was holding everything inside her, not because she was weak, but because she was building something too powerful to reveal prematurely. And Ethan, still playing his part, still believing in his own script, was walking through those 3 days like a man strolling across a frozen lake, confident, smiling, completely unaware of how thin the ice had become. The message came at 2:13 a.m. Nia was awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between Ethan's breaths. Sleep had become unnecessary. Her body no longer trusted rest. When her phone vibrated softly against the nightstand, she reached for it without hesitation, already knowing that whatever waited on the screen would redraw the boundaries of her life. I have it. You need to see this in person. No emojis, no qualifiers, no reassurance. Just truth, waiting. They met the next morning in a private conference room at a co-working space downtown. Neutral ground, paid in cash, no sign-in sheets. Marcus arrived first, seated at the table with a slim laptop closed in front of him, a legal pad beside it. He stood when Nia entered, nodded once, and gestured for her to sit. "You ready?" he asked. Nia didn't answer immediately. She placed her bag down carefully, as if the way she moved still mattered, as if order could keep something catastrophic from spilling. Then she met his eyes. Yes. Marcus opened the laptop. What followed was not dramatic in the way movies taught people to expect. There was no single explosive revelation, no gasp-worthy twist. Instead, there was something far more devastating. Structure. He showed her charts, timelines, color-coded transfers that mapped Ethan's financial behavior over the last 18 months with brutal clarity. Small withdrawals from their joint account, amounts low enough to avoid triggering alerts. Irregular intervals, a few hundred here, 1,000 there. Together, they added up to nearly $40,000. Pattern, Marcus said quietly. Classic laundering behavior for individuals who think they're being subtle. Nia felt her jaw tighten, but she didn't look away. Marcus clicked to the next screen. A separate checking account opened in Ethan's name alone, funded exclusively by those withdrawals. From there, the money moved again. Rent payments, utilities, furniture purchases. An apartment on the north side of the city, leased under a shell LLC Ethan controlled. He's been living 2 lives, Marcus said, financially and emotionally. The screen changed again. Credit applications. Nia leaned forward. 2 cards, both approved, both tied to her credit history. He used marital access, Marcus explained. Didn't forge anything, didn't need to, but he never disclosed it. He's carrying high balances, minimum payments only. What was he buying? Nia asked, though part of her already knew. Marcus didn't answer verbally. He pulled up receipts. Jewelry, weekend hotel stays, flights booked last minute, a dining bill at a restaurant Nia had once suggested for their anniversary, all charged to credit that bore her name as collateral. Something inside her chest went cold and still. This isn't just infidelity, Marcus said. This is financial exploitation. He paused before opening the final folder. I need you to understand what this next part means, he continued. Once you see it, there's no going back to pretending this was about love or confusion. Nia nodded. The screen filled with emails, not between Ethan and Lauren, between Ethan and his lawyer. Marcus had obtained them through lawful means. Metadata trails, misconfigured forwarding, professional sloppiness Ethan hadn't accounted for. The messages were clinical, detached, strategic. Ethan outlined his plan. He intended to argue that the condo and Nia's business growth were marital achievements, made possible by his emotional support and network access. He instructed his lawyer to emphasize her long hours, her distance, her supposed emotional reliance on him during stressful periods. One line burned itself into her vision. If necessary, we can frame her as unstable under pressure. Courts respond to imbalance. Nia read it twice, 3 times. The room felt smaller. They were going to say I was unstable, she said softly, to justify stealing from me. Marcus nodded. That's exactly what they were setting up. The silence that followed was heavy, but not chaotic. It felt final. In that moment, something essential inside Nia shifted. Not broke, but recalibrated. The last remnants of hope, the instinct to soften the truth, evaporated. This wasn't a marriage failing. This was a man committing fraud while preparing to destroy her credibility to protect himself. Nia sat back in her chair, hands folded neatly in her lap. "How bad is this for him?" she asked. Marcus met her gaze. "If you pursue everything, career-ending, possibly criminal." She absorbed that without visible reaction. "And for me? You're protected," he said. "You documented early. You stayed silent. You have clean hands. Judges like clean hands." Nia exhaled slowly. For days, she had been bracing for devastation, for the moment when the truth would finally crush her. Instead, she felt something else rise in its place. Resolve. Ethan hadn't underestimated her emotionally. He'd underestimated her structurally. He'd assumed she would react like a betrayed wife, not like a professional trained to dismantle deception. He'd assumed love had softened her, that trust had dulled her instincts. He was wrong. Nia stood. "Send everything to my attorney," she said. "Encrypted, full package." Marcus closed the laptop. Already prepared, as Nia walked out into the morning light, Chicago rising around her in steel and glass, she understood something with crystalline certainty. The man she had loved was gone. In his place stood someone she no longer needed to understand, only to hold accountable. And from that moment on, nothing would be about saving a marriage. It would be about closing a case. The change didn't begin with a mirror. It began with space. Nia stood in the quiet of a small salon tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner. No chandeliers, no champagne, no audience. She had chosen it deliberately. She didn't want transformation to look like a performance. She wanted it to feel like a decision. The stylist asked what she was thinking. Nia didn't give a speech. She didn't explain her marriage or her pain or the files now sitting on her attorney's desk. She only said, "I want what's mine to look like it belongs to me." The scissors moved. Hair fell in soft, decisive strokes. Not dramatic, not reckless, measured. The length she'd kept for years because Ethan liked it disappeared inch by inch. Not as an act of rebellion, as an act of accuracy. The woman in the chair wasn't shedding an identity. She was removing an accommodation. When it was done, Nia looked at herself and felt something settle into place. The cut was clean, intentional, framing her face with the kind of clarity she'd spent her life cultivating everywhere except her reflection. She didn't smile. She nodded once, like a professional approving a final draft. Back at home, the condo felt different. Not emptier, quieter. As if the walls themselves had been waiting for her to notice who had been taking up all the oxygen. Ethan noticed the change immediately. He always did when something shifted that wasn't centered on him. He paused in the doorway, eyes narrowing slightly, not in admiration, but in calculation. "You cut your hair," he said. "Yes," Nia replied, placing her keys on the counter. "It's different," he added, as if searching for the right tone. "I liked it longer." Nia turned to face him, not sharply, not defensively. She simply looked at him, and for the first time in years, didn't adjust herself to soften the moment. "I like it this way," she said. The silence stretched. She could almost hear the gears in his mind turning, recalibrating. This wasn't how these conversations usually went. She didn't usually end them. "You didn't mention you were thinking about it," he said, a faint edge creeping into his voice. "We usually talk about things like that." Nia considered him for a beat, this man who had talked extensively about affairs, finances, and exit strategies without ever mentioning them to her. "Do we?" she asked mildly. The question landed harder than she intended. Ethan blinked. "I just mean, marriage is about communication." "Is it?" Nia said. Her tone remained even, curious. "Because there seemed to be a lot of important conversations happening without me." His jaw tightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I wanted a change," she replied. "So I made one." She walked past him and into the bedroom, closing the door gently behind her. Later that night, Ethan paced. Nia could feel it even when she wasn't looking. The way his energy shifted, the way he watched her as if searching for a crack, a cue, some sign that this was about him. He asked questions framed as concern. He offered compliments that landed like ownership. He tested boundaries with casual touches, subtle corrections, reminders of shared history. She didn't take the bait. The glow-up wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anything. It wasn't about being seen as desirable by someone who had already proven himself unworthy of the view. It was about alignment. Nia began wearing clothes that felt like her, tailored, precise, unbothered by trends. She changed nothing about her makeup except the way she applied it, slower, more intentional. She stopped asking Ethan's opinion on anything that belonged to her body, her schedule, her silence. And the more she withdrew permission, the more unsettled he became. That was the part he couldn't understand. Men like Ethan believed control was invisible until it was threatened. They mistook accommodation for agreement. They thought women changed for attention. Nia changed for accuracy. One evening, as she reviewed documents on her laptop, Ethan stood in the doorway and watched her. "You've been distant," he said finally. She didn't look up. "I've been focused." He crossed his arms. "On what?" Nia saved her file, closed the laptop, and met his eyes. There was no anger in her expression, no sadness, only something firm and unmoving. "On myself," she said. The answer seemed to disorient him. He shifted his weight, unsettled. "That's new." "No," Nia replied softly. "It's just visible now." She returned to her work, leaving him standing there with the uneasy realization that something fundamental had changed, and that whatever it was, it didn't require his approval. That night, lying beside him, Nia felt lighter than she had in weeks. Not because the situation was resolved, not because the pain was gone, but because she was no longer pretending that becoming herself was something she needed to justify. The glow-up wasn't about him, and that, she knew, was exactly why it frightened him. The morning it happened, the city looked unchanged. Chicago woke the way it always did. Elevators groaning to life, coffee lines forming, traffic stacking itself into impatient rows. From the outside, it was just another weekday. Inside Nia Carter, something final had already settled. She stood at her kitchen counter, dressed for work, coffee untouched. Her phone lay beside her, silent now, emptied of secrets. Everything that mattered had already been sent, duplicated, encrypted, and placed in hands far steadier than Ethan's. At 7:42 a.m., her screen lit up. Denise Holloway. It's time. No drama, no buildup. Just 3 words that carried the weight of a controlled detonation. Nia closed her eyes for a brief moment, not in hesitation, but in acknowledgement. This was the point of no return. Not emotionally, legally, structurally. Once this happened, the story would no longer belong to Ethan. It would belong to records, filings, and consequences. She typed back one word: proceed. Across the city, Denise Holloway's office moved with practiced efficiency. Documents finalized, exhibits attached, timelines referenced, evidence indexed, every accusation anchored to a fact, every claim supported by proof. No speculation, no emotion, just an unarguable narrative built from Ethan's own actions. The petition was filed electronically at 8:19 a.m. By 8:21, it existed in the system, time-stamped, immutable. Nia didn't feel a rush of triumph. She felt stillness. Ethan emerged from the bedroom moments later, tying his tie, already halfway into the role he played so convincingly at work. "I'm heading out early," he said. "Big day." She looked at him and thought, "You have no idea." "Okay," she replied calmly. "There's coffee if you want some." He leaned down and kissed her cheek. The familiarity of the gesture no longer registered as intimacy, only habit. He grabbed his briefcase and left, humming softly, confident, unburdened. At 9:03 a.m., he was served. Not at home, not privately, at his office. The process server was discreet but unmistakable. A professional interruption. Papers handed over. Signatures requested. witnesses present. A moment designed not to humiliate, but to be undeniable. Ethan read the first page, standing up. By the third, he sat down. By the fifth, his face had drained of color. The filing didn't accuse him of being unfaithful. It accused him of being deliberate, of misrepresentation, of financial misconduct, of intent. It laid out his pattern with clinical clarity, stripped of emotional language, supported by exhibits he recognized instantly: the apartment, the accounts, the credit, the emails to his lawyer. At 9:17 a.m., Nia's phone began to vibrate. Ethan. She didn't answer. The calls came in rapid succession, one after another. Then texts. What is this? You blindsided me. We need to talk. This is a mistake. She watched the notifications stack up without opening a single one. At 9:26 a.m., the tone shifted. You're overreacting. This is extreme. You're trying to ruin me. At 9:31 a.m., the mask finally slipped. You think you're smarter than me? You're going to regret this. Nia took a screenshot and forwarded it to Denise with a single note. Threatening language. Time-stamped. She placed the phone face down on the counter and exhaled slowly. At work, she moved through her morning like any other. Meetings, emails, decisions made without visible strain. If anyone noticed a difference, they didn't say so. And if they had looked closely, they might have seen it not as distress, but as something sharper, focus stripped of distraction. At 10:48 a.m., an unfamiliar number called. She answered this one. Nia Carter? A man asked, voice tight. Yes. This is Robert Klein. I represent Ethan Walker. She could hear it then, the strain beneath the professionalism, the recalculation already underway. There must be some misunderstanding, he continued quickly. These filings— There is no misunderstanding, Nia interrupted pleasantly. Everything in that filing is documented and accurate. If you wish to communicate further, you may do so through my attorney, Denise Holloway. There was a pause. Then carefully, Denise Holloway is representing you? Yes. The silence stretched longer this time. I see, he said finally. Have a good day, Mr. Klein, Nia replied, and ended the call. At 11:02 a.m., Ethan's number appeared again. She blocked it. By noon, the office lobby where Ethan worked was buzzing, not with gossip, but with the quiet tension that followed visible instability. People noticed when a man who prided himself on control lost it publicly, when raised voices carried, when security intervened. Someone recorded it. By the time Nia left work that evening, the narrative had already begun to shift. Not loudly, not explosively, just enough. That night, she returned home to a condo that felt larger than it ever had. Ethan wasn't there. His absence felt less like loss and more like clearance. On the kitchen counter, he had left a note. She read it once, expression unreadable, then tore it neatly in half and dropped it into the trash. The filing was done. The performance was over. And for the first time since that morning in the kitchen days ago, Nia Carter slept. Not because everything was resolved, but because everything that mattered was now in motion. The case was open. And Ethan Walker, finally, was no longer in control of the story he'd been telling everyone, including himself. By the next morning, Ethan Walker had stopped trying to sound reasonable. Reason was a costume he wore when it benefited him. At work, in meetings, in negotiations where charm could substitute for honesty. But when the filing hit, when the paper trail snapped shut around him like a trap, something in him panicked. And panic is what exposes people. Nia was in her office when Alicia Grant, her operations director and the closest thing she had to a shield, knocked once and stepped inside without waiting. Her expression was tight, controlled, the look of someone managing a fire in a hallway full of dry paper. Nia, she said quietly, closing the door behind her. He's here. Nia didn't look up from her laptop. Ethan? Alicia nodded. And he's not alone. That made Nia's fingers pause over the keyboard. Who's with him? Alicia hesitated. A woman, white, late 20s, professionally dressed but shaken. Nia felt her pulse tick once, sharp and immediate, then settle. She didn't need a name. She already knew the shape of this. "Lauren," she said softly. Alicia's brows lifted. "So that's her." Nia leaned back in her chair. Outside the glass wall of her office, the open plan space hummed with subdued workplace noise. But she could hear something else underneath it. Voices, tension, the faint ripple of attention moving toward the lobby. Alicia continued, "Security asked him to leave. He refused. He's making a scene." "Good," Nia said. Alicia blinked. "Good?" Nia's gaze stayed steady. "Ask someone to record. Not obviously, just make sure we have it." Alicia's mouth tightened into something like approval. Already done. Nia closed her laptop and stood. She didn't rush. She didn't rehearse a speech. She didn't need to. She walked toward the door with the calm of someone stepping into a meeting she had prepared for. As she approached the lobby, the noise sharpened. Ethan's voice carried, louder than it needed to be, polished indignation crumbling into something raw. "This is insane," he shouted. "This is my wife. She's trying to destroy me." People were watching. Employees, building staff, a couple of clients waiting at reception who had turned their heads politely but couldn't stop listening. Even in a professional building, drama had gravity. Nia stopped just out of sight behind a glass partition and observed. Ethan stood near the front desk, posture rigid, jaw clenched, one hand gripping a folder of papers so tightly his knuckles were pale. His tie was slightly loosened, hair imperfect, the first visible crack in his executive armor. His eyes scanned the room like a man looking for an ally and finding only witnesses. Beside him stood Lauren Pierce. She looked smaller than Nia had imagined, not physically, but emotionally. Her shoulders were pulled in, arms wrapped around herself, as if she could contain her own confusion. Her gaze darted from Ethan to the security guards, to the employees whispering at the edges of the lobby. She wasn't angry yet. She was realizing. Ethan turned toward the reception desk again. "Tell her to come out here," he demanded. "We need to talk like adults." One of the guards, calm and firm, replied, "Sir, you've been asked to leave the premises." Ethan scoffed. "This is ridiculous. She can't keep me from my own wife." Lauren flinched at the word wife. Nia felt a cool, distant compassion for her. Just a flicker. Lauren had been lied to too. Whatever she thought she was walking into today, it wasn't this. Ethan's voice rose again. "She's ungrateful. She's vindictive. After everything I did for her, after everything I sacrificed, this is what I get? She's stealing my life." Stealing. The word was almost funny, coming from a man whose financial trail was now sitting in Denise Holloway's office in neat, devastating columns. Lauren's face changed. Not fully, but enough. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if a question had just taken root in her mind. If he's willing to scream like this in public, what else was he willing to do in private? Alicia moved beside Nia, holding her phone down at her side, recording without drawing attention. Her lips barely moved as she murmured, "He's been here 10 minutes. It's escalating." Nia watched Ethan's performance unravel. He tried different angles the way manipulators always did when cornered. Rage, victimhood, moral superiority, then a sudden softness as if he might cry. "Please," he said, lowering his voice just enough to sound wounded. "I just want to talk to her. She's being extreme." The guard didn't move. "Sir, you need to leave." Ethan's composure snapped. He slammed the folder down on the counter, papers scattering. "Do you know who I am?" he shouted. That was the moment. The moment the mask fell so completely there was no recovering it. Because the question wasn't really about identity. It was about entitlement. Lauren took a small step back, eyes wide now. She looked at Ethan as if she were seeing him for the first time. Not the charming man who promised her a future. Not the misunderstood lover trapped in a dead marriage. Just a man in public, losing control. Ethan turned abruptly, scanning the lobby again, and his eyes landed where Nia stood behind the glass. For a second, his expression froze. Shock, anger, and something close to fear colliding in the space of a breath. Nia didn't wave. She didn't smile. She didn't offer him anything he could twist into a story. She simply looked at him, calm, still, unreadable. And that look did more damage than any argument ever could, because it told him, without a single word, that she wasn't afraid of him anymore. Ethan surged forward, as if to reach her, but the guard stepped in, blocking him. He fought it, twisting, raising his voice again, louder now, desperate. "Tell her she can't do this to me," he yelled. "Tell her she'll regret it." Nia didn't move. Alicia's phone continued recording. Lauren's face went pale. She stared at Ethan, then at Nia behind the glass, and something in her expression softened into a grim understanding. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a man being exposed. And when security finally pushed Ethan toward the door, his outrage echoing through the lobby, the entire building watched him go. Not as a respected executive, not as a wronged husband, but as exactly what he had been all along. A liar who had run out of places to hide. By the time Ethan Walker sat across from his lawyer 3 days later, the fight had already left him. What remained was calculation stripped of arrogance, panic pretending to be reason. The conference room was too bright, too quiet, the kind of sterile space designed to make people feel small when their options had narrowed. Ethan sat rigid in his chair, jaw tight, leg bouncing beneath the table. Across from him, his attorney flipped through a thick stack of documents with the slow, deliberate care of someone choosing words that could not afford to be wrong. "This isn't salvageable," the lawyer said at last. Ethan looked up sharply. "That's what I'm paying you to fix." The lawyer met his gaze without flinching. "No, you're paying me to tell you the truth. And the truth is, you don't have leverage." Ethan scoffed weakly. "That's not what you said before." "Before," the lawyer replied calmly, "I didn't have this." He slid a copy of Denise Holloway's filing across the table. Ethan didn't need to read it again. He already knew it by heart. The timelines, the transfers, the credit accounts, the emails he'd never imagined would see daylight. And now, worse than all of it, the footage from the lobby. Grainy, unpolished, devastating. A man yelling, gesturing wildly, security stepping in. No context could save it. "You're exposed," the lawyer continued. "Financial misconduct, undisclosed debt, misrepresentation, and intent. That last part is what kills you." Ethan swallowed. "What happens if we fight?" The lawyer didn't hesitate. "Discovery, subpoenas, forensic audits, depositions. Your employer will be dragged into it. So will your former firm. And if her attorney decides to push the fraud angle criminally," he let the sentence trail off. Ethan's shoulders slumped. For the first time since he'd opened that first secret account, he understood something with sickening clarity. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was damage control. The settlement proposal arrived that afternoon. Ethan stared at it like it was written in another language. Full relinquishment of any claim to Nia's business. Full relinquishment of any claim to the condo beyond documented contributions. Immediate repayment of misappropriated funds with interest. An ironclad non-disclosure agreement. In exchange, no criminal charges, no public filings beyond the divorce record, no pursuit of punitive damages. Silence. He laughed once, hollow and disbelieving. "She's trying to erase me." His lawyer shook his head. "No, she's giving you a way out." Ethan thought of Nia then, not as his wife, not as the woman he once loved, but as the person he had fundamentally misunderstood. He'd believed her restraint was weakness. He'd believed her trust was naivete. He'd believed her success was something he could leverage. What he'd never accounted for was her discipline. Nia wasn't trying to destroy him. She was containing him. On the other side of the city, Nia sat in Denise Holloway's office, hands folded neatly in her lap as she reviewed the same document. Denise watched her closely, reading not the text, but the woman. "This ends it," Denise said. "If he signs, it's clean, fast, final." "And if he doesn't?" Nia asked. Denise's smile was thin. "Then we proceed, and he learns how loud the truth can get." Nia nodded once. She didn't need to be told which path she preferred. That evening, Ethan signed. There was no dramatic confrontation, no last plea, no speech about love or regret. just a pen scratching across paper, line by line, as he surrendered every advantage he thought he had. When it was done, his lawyer collected the documents and stood. "I'll file this immediately." Ethan remained seated. For a long moment, he stared at his hands like they belonged to someone else. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he said quietly. Denise's voice came through the speakerphone, cool, precise. "It wasn't supposed to happen because you assumed the woman you married would react emotionally. She didn't." The line went dead. Later that night, Nia returned to the condo, alone. Ethan had already removed what he could legally take: clothes, personal items, a few books. The rest sat untouched, as if even he had finally understood what did and did not belong to him. On the kitchen counter, he'd left a note. She read it once. "I never thought you could be so cold. You've changed. You're not the woman I married." Nia folded the paper carefully and dropped it into the trash. "I know," she said softly to the empty room. "That woman trusted you." She poured herself a glass of water and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights spreading endlessly in every direction. Somewhere out there, Ethan was adjusting to a life smaller than the one he'd planned. Smaller because of his own choices. Her phone buzzed. Denise Holloway. He signed. "It's over." Nia closed her eyes, not in relief, in release. The agreement he never thought he'd sign wasn't just a legal document. It was the final confirmation that the version of her he'd underestimated no longer existed, and that the woman standing here now would never again confuse restraint with weakness. She was free, and freedom, she knew, was worth every illusion she'd lost to claim it. Time did what nothing else could. It didn't soften the truth. It didn't rewrite the past. It simply stripped it of urgency. 3 months after the agreement was signed, Nia Carter walked into a charity gala held in a renovated steel hall along the river. It was the kind of event Chicago loved, quietly prestigious, selective without being flashy, filled with people who knew one another's reputations long before they learned names. She arrived alone, not as a statement, not as a shield, simply because she wanted to. Her dress was understated and precise, the kind of elegance that didn't beg to be noticed, but inevitably was. Her hair framed her face cleanly now, no longer a compromise, no longer an afterthought. She moved through the room with an ease that came not from confidence performed, but from certainty earned. She spoke with donors, laughed with colleagues, listened more than she talked. And then, across the room, she saw him. Ethan Walker stood near the bar, a drink untouched in his hand. He looked thinner, not physically exactly, though that too, but diminished, like someone whose presence no longer filled the space around him. The ease he once carried had hardened into effort. The charm had become something rehearsed. For a moment, their eyes met. Ethan's face flickered through a familiar sequence: surprise, hope, calculation. He straightened, as if instinctively preparing to step back into a role he believed he could still play. Nia felt nothing, not anger, not triumph, not even sadness, just recognition. She didn't look away out of fear or pride. She simply allowed the moment to pass, the way you might acknowledge a stranger who vaguely reminds you of someone you used to know. Ethan hesitated, then crossed the room. "Nia," he said, voice carefully controlled. "You look, well." "Thank you," she replied, polite, warm, finished. "So do you." It was a kindness. And like all real kindness, it carried no invitation. "I've been meaning to reach out," he continued, lowering his voice as if they were sharing something private. "Things got intense at the end. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't handle things the way I should have." Nia studied him, not critically, not harshly, but clearly. "I appreciate the sentiment," she said, "but there's nothing left to resolve." His brow furrowed. "I just think, after everything, we owe it to ourselves to acknowledge what we had." Nia smiled, small and genuine. "What we had doesn't require acknowledgement anymore. It already taught me what I needed to learn." He searched her face, as if looking for an opening, a crack, some lingering emotion he could still access. "You really don't feel anything?" he asked quietly. She considered the question honestly. I feel grateful, she said, for clarity, for boundaries, for knowing myself better now than I did then. Ethan's shoulders sagged, almost imperceptibly. I didn't realize what I was losing, he said. Not until it was gone. That's often how it works, Nia replied. Not unkindly, not cruelly, simply true. She glanced past him, toward a colleague waiting to introduce her to a potential partner on a new initiative. The future, standing patiently, asking nothing of the past. I wish you well, Ethan, she said, truly. And then she turned away. No dramatic exit, no final line meant to wound. Just a redirection of her attention to a life that no longer included him. Ethan stood there for a moment, watching her disappear into the crowd, the realization settling slowly and painfully into place. She hadn't won. She had moved on. That was the part no one warned him about. That indifference wasn't coldness. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't punishment. It was freedom. Later that night, standing by the windows overlooking the river, Nia reflected on how different this felt from the anger she'd once imagined would sustain her. Rage burned hot but fast. Vindication was loud but brief. Indifference, though, that was quiet, durable, complete. It meant she no longer needed him to understand, no longer needed him to regret, no longer needed him to see her value. She already did, and that was the power he could never take from her. The power of being untouched by the person who once believed he could define her. Nia lifted her glass in a small, private gesture, not to Ethan, not to the past, but to the woman she had become. Not hardened, not closed, just free. And freedom, she knew now, was the most devastating kind of closure there was. A year later, the city still looked the same, but Nia Carter did not. She stood on the balcony of her condo at sunrise, coffee warming her palms, watching Chicago stretch awake below her. Traffic lights blinked. The river caught the early gold of morning. Life moved forward, indifferent to who had fallen behind. And so had she, the woman who once cried in silence, who measured her worth by someone else's certainty, felt distant now, like a version of herself she could honor without needing to return to. That woman had loved deeply, trusted openly, given generously. None of that had been weakness. It had been preparation. Nia's life was full in a way that didn't announce itself. Her work carried weight. Her voice was sought after in rooms where decisions were made. Her calendar was busy, but not crowded. She chose carefully now. Projects, people, silences. She had learned that peace was not the absence of pain, but the presence of self-respect. Sometimes she heard Ethan's name in passing, through industry whispers, mutual acquaintances, second-hand updates she never asked for. Each time it landed with less impact, until eventually it landed with none at all. He had become a chapter. She had become the story. Nia no longer explained herself. She no longer softened her edges to make others comfortable. She no longer mistook attention for love or endurance for loyalty. She understood now that real power wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, wasn't cruel. It was steady. It was knowing when to walk away without looking back. It was choosing growth over grievance. It was building a life so aligned that betrayal couldn't dismantle it. She had not survived. She had transformed. And if there was one truth she carried forward into every room, every conversation, every choice, it was this: you are not defined by who tried to break you. You are defined by who you become after you refuse to stay broken. Nia Carter lifted her coffee cup slightly, a quiet toast to the woman she had become. Not perfect, not untouched, but real, grounded, free. And somewhere out there, someone listening to this story was standing at the beginning of their own reckoning. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or forced to rebuild, let this be your reminder. Your ending hasn't been written yet. Like the video, share your thoughts in the comments. Follow the channel for more stories of resilience, clarity, and power reclaimed. Because the moment you choose yourself, that's when everything changes.